Dragon Age 2 was released in March 2011 in Europe. It is unfortunately clear that the original sales were driven by the reputation of Origins. The game was critically controversial, with many fans and critics expressing disappointment over its rushed development, recycled environments, and faster combat style. Many qualified the reception as being horrific, several orders of magnitude worse than Veilguard. I can vividly remember the drama surrounding this game at the time of the release. You would think that BioWare learned from the shortcomings of Dragon Age Origins, but you would be terribly mistaken. The second installment of this franchise does not refine what worked in Origins, but instead chooses to remove depth in favor of speed, and the great systems pay the price. In today's episode of Dragon Age Retrospective and Legacy, we will discuss Dragon Age 2. Like you already know, we will talk about the systems, what is good, what is bad, and how they can be improved. I will try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, as the story is not quite what interests me the most. I will talk about the story only when it impacts the gameplay. Also, I kept the modding to a minimum. I used only one mod for Isabella due to obvious reasons. With these considerations out of the way, my name is Henry Hoffman Myers, your Hex Grid scientist. If you enjoyed this type of content, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe to my channel, and now let's begin. From the very first moment, we can see that the character creation has been simplified. There are no longer races or origins. The player can choose from 3 classes and the gender of the main character. Also, if you choose the presets or how the character was envisioned by the developers, all the sliders are disabled. Alright, we are not up to a great start. To say this is restrictive would be an understatement. My question is, why can't I edit anything if I choose the default preset? I wanted to modify the hair, to pick a different style. Why can't I do that? There is no benefit in doing so, only a loss of player agency, so what's the point? Dragon Age 2 is trying to copy Mass Effect. You are no longer playing a nameless character that is meant to be a vessel for you to identify with. You are playing a character with a name and a pre-established story, and you can't get away from it.
Let's find someplace quieter. I think I just threw up a little in my mouth.
Ha!
You are Hawke, a human from Lothering that fled the Blight. That's all. This is no longer your story, it is Hawke's, and you can't deviate from it too much, as that story already happened and it is narrated. The game establishes that Varric is narrating the events that happen, so your task as a player is to fine-tune some of the events, but not to change them. It is not a bad approach, it worked for Mass Effect, The Witcher and so on. But we will see soon enough why it is not working here. There is not much to tell, the character creation screen could just as well be missing entirely, as it is clear that the game doesn't want me to modify anything. Let's continue with the combat section. I hope you are ready for the dumpster fire that is the combat of Dragon Age 2. It is both a frustrating and enlightening experience. The first thing you can probably notice is that the combat style appears faster. It is an illusion. BioWare didn't just speed things up, they rebuilt combat around a completely different philosophy. It is no longer a tactical RPG simulation, but a cinematic action loop. We can see exaggerated movements, huge weapon arcs, enemies flying, and instant gap closers. But if we strip away the flashy animations, Dragon Age 2 is still a real-time with pause game. But the input economy has been completely rebalanced compared to classic designs such as Dragon Age Origins. You are no longer required to pause the game every time to assess the situation and react. Decisions no longer hold that much weight, instead the focus falls on constant movement and aggressive tactics. Your characters have to constantly hit something, otherwise you'll end up overrun by the swarms of enemies that keep coming. Encounters are even more frequent, the number of enemies is constantly increasing. A layer of action loop is added onto a tactical engine, and this is absolutely bad, and I'll tell you why. The whole gameplay has changed to accommodate this questionable combat choice. I understand the need to make the combat feel more fluid and more dynamic. The animations are indeed beautiful, they feel cinematic and flexible. The gap closers are a great addition, but you absolutely cannot forget this is done in a real-time with pause context. The combat animation has a small delay, it feels like a junior 3D artist tried to showcase their work. The transition from one state to the other looks like a mannequin showing poses. It is not fluid but deliberately interrupted. This comes from a mismatch between animation and a tick-based combat engine. Dragon Age 2 uses keyframe-heavy cinematic animations inside a system that resolves actions in discrete time slices. This leads to big wind-up poses, extreme impact and sudden recovery. All of these are designed to look great in screenshots and trailers, but in reality the experience appears blocky and over-delayed. The tick system forces animation snapping because combat updates in discrete ticks instead of smoothly interpolating motion. This turns from a smooth transition between states of the character into a slideshow of poses. It is unfinished and it makes me feel like I'm watching a stop motion cartoon. I want to have fun in combat, not watch Coraline. This leads to attacks resolving almost instantly, enemies dying mid-pose, new animations interrupting old ones. This sudden change in design philosophy makes the pose completely irrelevant and could have just as well been removed. The systems were redesigned so posing gives you almost no strategic benefit. Enemies spawn mid-fight, the AI re-evaluates constantly and damage bursts instantly. By the time you decide to pause, the information on the battlefield is already outdated and the position no longer holds any value. This happens because the game no longer delivers fewer bigger updates in a tick, but more smaller ones. As such, you are freezing a micro moment and not a strategic state. BioWare managed to create a Frankenstein by using an engine while deliberately creating systems that undermine the core identity of that engine. You end up delivering a strange monstrosity. Dragon Age 2 is creating constantly shifting chaos where even perfect planning becomes obsolete in a matter of seconds. This creates a culture of reacting instead of planning. Also, the swarming problem. If you remember, I was explaining why swarming is bad encounter design in the previous video. Well, Dragon Age 2 managed to make the situation even worse. The enemies now come in waves, so an encounter turns into 3 or more. The enemies are usually grunts, led by a somewhat stronger leader. The encounter frequency rate has been increased, and it makes even less sense than in previous games. Usually, when you design encounters, you should think, should this group of enemies be placed here? If it makes sense, then you put it there. Instead, it uses its geographical locations as combat arenas that will spawn enemies until a certain pacing target is met. The encounter frequency isn't a byproduct of exploration, it is a deliberately engineered pacing system. The system actively tracks things such as timing combat, enemy skill per minute, and then it injects new waves to maintain intensity. That's why an area is never cleared, but the combat encounters actively respawn. You are never safe. If the threat level drops, the system will spawn a new wave. If a wave is cleared too fast, another will spawn sooner, and that repeats until an encounter quota is reached. If I were to put a label on this system, I will say it is diabolical. Encounters are artificially engineered based on how long the system wants combat to last. And the worst part, this system is implemented to keep your brain busy so you don't notice how shallow and empty the world is. Repeated map design, reused assets, and little to no enemy variety. You fight the same enemies, a bit reskinned and with different names. This might sound familiar, Mass Effect also does that, but let me tell you something. This is a type of system engineering designed for shooters, not for real time with pause. I already mentioned the concept of combat fatigue. The game feels intense, but it is exhausting and it paves the way for live service design. It is a dopamine pacing loop, not difficult, not ingenious. Dragon Age 2 paces combat like an arcade action game, delivering non-stop micro rewards through waves after waves of enemies and without downtime for the brain to recover. Not only once I wondered, why would you place this group of enemies here, and why would you place them now? And the answer is, nobody plays them there, it is automated. The combat system is not just bad, it is bad on purpose to drag the gaming hours, to squeeze a couple more hours from you. The philosophy also applies to boss design. Every single boss fight in the game plays the exact same way. You have the big bad creature with a ton of HP that summons lots of adds in waves in an attempt to overrun your party. That's it. It gets so ridiculous that in the later stages of the game the engine crumbles. There are so many enemies on screen with so many abilities and graphical effects that the game starts to lag. Now that we managed to explain the proliferation of bad system, it is time to discuss how it affected the world. If the action of Dragon Age Origins takes place in the whole kingdom of Ferelden, Dragon Age 2 makes the player explore the city of Kirkwall and the surrounding areas. This is a monumental ramp down. Although the playable areas are in the same city, they feel disconnected. This was also the case for Dragon Age Origins, but there it made sense. The game has a day and night cycle, with some quests only being available during nighttime. This cycle works only for the areas of the city, not for the surrounding areas. At night, the encounter system does its worst, throwing wave after wave of irrelevant enemies at you. What I find the most annoying is the lack of soul the city has. The story features 3 time skips, and you would expect that the city evolves or at least changes somehow during this period of time. Well, no. The same NPCs in the same places doing the same things. No structural change, no new houses, no nothing. The city of Kirkwall is constantly frozen in time. This is great if you like asset recycling and budget cuts. Always the same map, no change. There is zero spatial logic between the districts, no new districts opening or old ones closing. This is not a world, just a menu of combat arenas. Looking at the map, it reminds me of Swords and Sandals. The night doesn't feel dangerous in a storytelling sense, it feels busy in a mechanical one. If reused interiors are annoying, a frozen city across a decade of storytime destroys narrative credibility. You should understand from the first couple of hours, the world design is a poor excuse to accommodate the combat system. The city becomes a hub, which is not a problem. Hub-based design is usually good if implemented properly. In Dragon Age 2, the hub is built as a static combat funnel, not as an evolving system. Also, hubs are often defined as safe spaces, a place where you can stock up, talk to NPCs, see the consequences of your actions, or just relax. Such is the case of the Citadel in Mass Effect. This design works well when the hub is a reactive world system, but it fails miserably when the hub is just a static content container. Let's take for example Novigrad from The Witcher 3. In Novigrad, guards' number increases during political crackdowns, NPCs' dialogue evolves with story progress, areas become safer or more hostile, and social mood shifts visibly. But you will say, well, The Witcher 3 was released later with more advanced technologies. Fair point. Let's take Whiterun from Skyrim as an example. It's a simple but responsive design. Citizens react to major events, guards comment on your achievements, political controls can shift. Skyrim was released in November 2011. There was not even a slight tint of interest for creating an immersive world in Dragon Age 2, just a playground for the predatory combat design. Dragon Age Origins had its problems, but it also had some semblance of good design. I loved the subclasses that could be unlocked based on story decisions, companion affection, or simply by buying books. You guessed right, this system is down the drain. I explained that Dragon Age Awakening did a beautiful job by introducing 2 more subclasses for each class that really improved how the class feels and plays out. If you enjoy that, well, tough love. Now we only have 3 subclasses for the main character, subclasses that require no contribution from the player to unlock aside from leveling. Also, companions can't learn them, instead each companion has their own unique talent. Companions can't access all the abilities, for example Mifil cannot heal although the other 2 mages can. This removes certain companions from party compositions because there are better options. So now there are less classes and you don't need to lift a finger to unlock them. Good job! The crafting system is also watered down. Instead of having to gather a certain number of consumable items, Dragon Age 2 treats ingredients as some endless pools. You have to discover a certain resource, and once discovered, that one acts as an endless node. As the game states so proudly, crafting doesn't deplete the resources, but Hawke's purse. Recipes can be missed and so can resource nodes, but the game introduces the Emporium, where you can buy those resources. It's not bad per se, just a bit unnatural. The number of recipes has been drastically reduced and you don't have to allocate points into crafting. In this case, simplification works. Relationships with companions are also no longer a concern. A character can either be a rival or a friend, providing bonuses either way. The game pretty much becomes a prime example of streamlining for quantity, not refinement. Also, companions have less armor slots than the player. They cannot equip different armor, boots, gloves or helmets. Their attire and the stats that come with it is changed either through story progression or through a set of upgrades that can be bought without visual change. Customizations and player agency were clearly not a priority. Dragon Age 2 is a prime example of predatory systems in a single player game. This kind of games paved the way for games as a service implementations that appeared later. They were the transition. Where Dragon Age Origins built its identity on a somewhat modern take on old school RPG mechanics, Dragon Age 2 stripped those systems down and rebuilt them around speed, automation and constant simulation. Combat is no longer tied to challenge or exploration, encounters are just a quota to be met and progression is no longer earned but handed out. Every major system of this game screams efficiency over immersion. The game is actually exhausting and really bad for your overall well-being. There are little to no rewards and satisfaction is the emotion I felt the least while playing. BioWare didn't evolve Dragon Age, they overlaid an action game pacing model onto a tactical RPG foundation and the entire structure buckled under the weight. I will say that Dragon Age 2 isn't just a controversial sequel, but a case study in what happens when decent systems become shallow and automation replaces design. This video has reached its end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe to my channel Hexcrit Scientist. I was Henry Hoffman Myers and we will meet again next time.